Well, that's going to be a tough act to follow, but I think we're going to touch on some of the same things, so I think it'll be good. Before we start, I have to announce Cassie's latest accomplishment. She has a long list of accomplishments, but for those who don't know, last night there was a chess tournament with a Tunde, and there were 10 players, 9 men, 1 woman, I believe, maybe 8 and 2, and Cassie was not victorious, but the last person standing. I take it... Not your first chess match? Excellent. So I want to dive into a bunch of stuff, but I do think Steffi's question is a good one. So what the heck is decision science, and what is it you do?
So I think that we should throw away our old definitions and reorient. So our lives boil down to 2 things. All the stuff that we can't control, all the random chaos, the stuff that we can't see coming, just by definition, right? The things that we can't do anything about. And then again, by definition, the other side is the things that we can do something about. And what is that? That is the quality of our decisions, how we steer our life, right? So there's the stuff you can't control, there's the stuff you can. And to me, decision-making is the steering wheel for our lives. Our decision skills, the quality of our decisions, that is the best ability to navigate through the world. Though, like a ship in a storm, you're not guaranteed safe harbor, but wouldn't it be better to steer? So then, how should we think about decision-making? Well, for me, it is the discipline of turning information into, hopefully, better action. But wait, any scale, any setting. So that means it has to be quite an encompassing thing, doesn't it? If you're going to be an expert in turning information to better action in any scale at any setting, you would then need to be able to deal with the information if it's coming in through your human senses, or if it is in a spreadsheet, or if it's petabyte scale and beyond. And you should be aggressively taking from every discipline that could possibly help you out to build this best possible steering wheel. So that's been how I've oriented my education. I really confused my college advisor, who said, with this mix of courses, you're never going to get a job. So it turns out you get the last laugh there. But for me, it has actually been quite a big frustration to exist in a period where data has been such a fascination. So for me, I was 8 years old when I discovered data. I discovered spreadsheets, which were the most beautiful thing in the universe. I had this gemstone collection. Its entire purpose was to get another gemstone so I could get another row from my spreadsheet. So I really, really like data. It's sort of putting order on chaos. It feels nice. But I understand that data is pretty, but it's not important. It's our decisions that are important. That's how we affect the world around us. That's what we should be trying to be as good at as we can. So that's how I see decision intelligence and decision making, and I also find it quite sad that there have been attempts to kind of grab this discipline and make it a small subpart of other disciplines. Like, is it really some tiny little fingernail of psychology? Is it some vague considerations somewhere in the basement of a philosophy department or a business school? I think that we can do better. Now, I want to say about the title of this talk. And I'm not going to throw the conference under the bus, but I will throw the conference under the bus, I apologize. They suggested that the talk be, "It's all about the data," to which I said, please put a question mark there, because I have some things to say. It really isn't. Data is a means to an end. And there are different things we could do with it. It could be, the end could be entertainment, could be automation, could be decision-making. So we've been so fascinated by data for its own sake, just because we could. Look, we can, but should we? And what should we use it for? So what I really hope we do as a society is we get over ourselves. We've gotten to the point where, like, yes, we can store data on things that are bigger than a floppy disk. Isn't that great? Now, what are we gonna do with it, and why? What is the big why? Can we reorient towards a why? And my title was Chief Data Scientist. I actually wanted to insist to change that word, data, to something a little more important. We pronounce data with a capital D. Why do we do that? Data is just better memory and better attention. Do you mind I do a little demonstration for them? All right, everybody, Close your eyes real quick. Everybody? You two in the front there. Okay, now, can you remember what the person in front of you is wearing? Imagine it, can you? Okay, open your eyes, right? Who got it perfectly? Who didn't get it? Right, now can I point out, that information was right there in front of you. So what happened? Why didn't you remember it? Because it wasn't important, because you didn't pay attention to it. And yet, had you taken a photograph, which is a data set in its own way, and stored as ones and zeros somewhere, you could have gone, and when it became important to you, you could have had a look and found that information. That really is the advantage of data. But data's not perfect. If someone had not felt it was important enough to take a photo of that piece of reality, it's gone. And so, it is really valuable that we can store stuff, that we can retrieve it, that we can adjust how we pay attention, that we can do things like take all the photographs and combine them, have a composite. What, if we felt like it, what is an average composite of all the people in front of all the people in this room? Whether or not that's useful, who knows? That's a decision-making question. I'm just holding forth, I apologize. We can do these things. It gives us better memory, better attention, different kind of sensory perception. Now that we have this kind of augmentation, what are we going to do with it? What will we use it for?
Mind if I jump in?
Please.
Okay.
Hold forth. I feel like I'm shutting up for the rest. That's it. No more talking for a week.
I want to pick up where Juan left off, because I think there's so many reasons why data alone isn't the answer. And I loved, in all my thinking, one of them was not that even though the data may stay the same, sex pretty much worked, to my best understanding, pretty similarly throughout human history. Same data set, different morals, different answers. So that's another factor on top of it, which is we can look at the same data and see things differently. How important is that to making decisions?
Oh, wow. I love your question, because it's enormously important. A lot of people are obsessed with this concept of data-driven. We want to be data-driven decision makers. And unfortunately, in order to be data-driven, you have to approach your decision in a particular way. Otherwise, you are, at best, what I call data-inspired, which is when we, like whales swimming around in plankton, just swim around in some numbers, and then we reach some kind of emotional tipping point and decide. And there are numbers near our decision somewhere, but our numbers did not drive that decision. So there's this phenomenon called confirmation bias. It is a perceptual effect. It's where we look at the same fact, the same number, 4.2, 42, whatever you like, and what we want to choose, what we want to do in our hearts of heart, the heart of hearts, whether we know, whether we're conscious of it or not, that changes how we see that number. And so, to be data-driven, you have to have, at the very minimum, an antidote to something like confirmation bias. Otherwise, you'll see that number, and it will look big to you, it will look small to you. It doesn't really matter what the fact is. You just convince yourself you did something data-driven, but you didn't.
And confirmation bias is one type of bias
exactly.
in there, but there are so much bias, and I think it is important if we're going to let AI, as the two panels ago, cure cancer. We better make sure it works equally well across different sets. And if we use the data, we're only going to find out how it treats white men, because that's what the data contains. And a quick, brief anecdote, we assume photograph. That's a perfect representation. And I have this lovely anecdote from yesterday. Cassie and I were going to meet in the speaker's lounge. She sent me a picture of what she was wearing. And if I'd just taken the photo she sent me of a pink top as gospel, I would have looked for the wrong outfit, because it was a pink backlight and you were wearing a black and white top. And you said, actually, it's not pink. But it's an example of, if you hadn't said that, a photograph, it's data, it must be real. How important is it, before we enter this wide, fabulous world of letting computers make decisions based on algorithms and essentially very fancy autocomplete, that we pay attention to where that data is coming from, who's in it, who's not?
Hugely important. I mean, the issues stack up, right? This is one of the advanced, really important issues, but look, we've already got this concept that you just have one number right there, and that already has the problem of a fact isn't a fact because your brain interprets it. Now, let's add another problem. When you have a complicated data set, the more complicated the data set is, the more of a Rorschach plot it is. So for those who aren't familiar, that's an ink blot where you dribble some ink, you fold the page over, then I show you, what do you see here? And you might go a bat, and you might go a pumpkin, and you might go a butterfly. And a lot of people will stop right there. But it's all these things. You could keep pushing. You could see 50 things, 500 things, because when there are complicated patterns, there are different ways to interpret it. So now when we've got a complex data set, all the meanings are there, part of the data set, but do they say anything about the world beyond them? Well, that's a whole nother issue. Now we add the issue of the data set itself may not be carefully chosen, carefully constructed, or even valid for what we might want. Now let's add another issue. Somehow we never bothered to think about what we want with the data set in the first place, and we just inherit something, and we assume it's perfect and magical, and we don't even ask ourselves, what could this represent? Is it good enough for us? And one of the things that is really important to learn as a decision maker is that you are always dealing with incomplete information, no matter how complete it is. There's some shortcut as part of it, just because we humans are clearly imperfect receptacles for reality. So what statisticians understand is when you have some information, but it's not all the information you should be caring about. The way you get from what you know to what you don't know, and I, by the way, I'm a recovering statistician, a very grumpy person as a result, but how you get from what you do know, from what you have, to what you wish you had, that bridge is assumptions. So you have to be very aware and comfortable with the assumptions you're willing to make. And now, would you be willing to look at this data set, look at it with a straight face and say, I assume that this data set that was collected, say it's a medical data set, collected only on white male college students, applies to all of humanity, and I think, therefore, that making a decision for all of humanity based on this data set is a great idea. Like, can you look yourself in the mirror with a straight face and do such a thing?
Well, you worked at Google, so I know you know there's plenty of people that will look at that data set, because then we get to the second problem of all the technology industry, which is they tend to have the same faces in the room interpreting the data as of the data that's collected. But I want to go beyond. It's easy to point out all the flaws, and I think it's very important to, but I want to use the benefit of your science, of your wisdom. So how do we start to make decisions based on these incomplete data sets? How do we recognize that they're incomplete but still useful? How do we make good decisions? What are the ingredients to making good decisions based on incomplete data?
The key is where you start. We've been so fascinated with the tools, we've been so fascinated with data with a capital D, that we don't realize that we as decision makers have to step up and create our own why, our own purpose. It's not like you just get the data set and then someone labeled some column in there, user happiness, and you're like, yeah, that's philosophically what happiness is, off we go. No, that might be like some people's propensity to click 4 or 5 stars on a survey or something, right? Start at the start. What are you trying to do? And my favorite sentence, if I were to boil down the best things that I've learned about decision-making, which, I've spent 20 years trying to learn everything I can about decision-making from every perspective. If I had to boil it down to one thing, one sentence, which if you used it would make you a better decision-maker, I have it for you, right here. It's a question. Ask yourself, ask other people, ask your spouses. This question is, what would it take to change your mind? So what's in here? Is my mind set to anything? Let's address that. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And depending on whether your mind is set to something, you have a different approach through data, through the decision path. Say your mind isn't set to anything, truly agnostic, that's rare in the human animal. Well then, you ask yourself, how much budget do I have for information? Get the best you can, and whatever signal seems better than the others, boom, that's your decision. But that's rarely how we frame things. Usually, there is something that you're going to do by default. And then the question is really, what would it take to change my mind? Okay, let's take ownership of this. What would convince me? What would have to be true? Really sit with that. What do the worlds look like when you want to do the thing versus not? And then ask yourself, how do I know which world I'm in? Which assumptions would I really be comfortable making?
I love that.
What information do I have? Is the information strong enough to convince me? And for some of these data sets that are just so garbage, the answer will be the data, throw it in the trash heap. It cannot change your mind. You will have to go with whatever you wanted to do in the first place. So own that. Where did it come from? You wanted it.
Well, and that was going to be my next question.
At least own it.
How, I think most of us make decisions based on a limited amount of incomplete data. What role does our gut have? What role does our inherent sense of that decision we should make play in good decision making? I think it plays a huge role in actual decision making, but what role does it play in good decision making, in your view, as a decision scientist?
Sure. So what do we mean when we talk about the gut? We say intuition or something like that. What is that really? That is that we, as pattern recognizing organisms, have encountered some patterns. We're not really aware of what went in, though. That's why you get these wonderful situations where a magician can place a decision in an audience member, and boom, the audience member thinks they're in control of the decision, but really some information came in to push them towards it, right? The fact that you get such phenomena means that we're not aware of the components of where our intuition pushes us, of our actual decision making. But we, as pattern-finding organisms, we encounter information, and through repeated practice, we can become better and better at certain domains. And in those domains where we've had practice and we've grown our skills and had our intuition reinforced, our spidey sense tingles in a useful way. So let me give you all an example. If I were to propose to you that you are going to some event this evening, it's a networking event, let's say, and then I were to show you an outfit and ask you, is this appropriate for said networking event? To varying degrees, you would be a decent fashion consultant, and then I do exactly the same thing with someone I've teleported from the 16th century. What are they going to know? What intuition have they built up as to what modern fashion should be? Right? So for certain things, we've got good intuition. Now, what we're not that good at is knowing necessarily, because this takes effort, when we are out of our depth, where we have no practice. Let's take us and drop us in the 16th century, and then good luck to us not offending whatever monarch we're supposed to go to dinner with.
So I want to interrupt because we're almost out of time, but I want to ask one question that I think is really important for this audience. So given what we've talked about and all the flaws, all the limits in the data, to what extent, what would your advice be in terms of what we allow computers to decide? Because they don't have those human qualities we've talked about. They're basing their decisions only on the data. Mm-hmm. What should we be cautious of? Like, what's your advice in terms of what decisions we allow computers to make on their own?
Okay, so here we go. I'm going to say the radical thing. We're not allowing computers to make any decisions at all, folks. Computers don't make decisions. There are people, humans, who have built those computers. There are people who have written that software, or if it's AI-based, you are programming with examples. There are people who have chosen what these things are going to do. And those people's decisions, of good or bad quality, who knows, are being amplified. And we forget that there is a human behind it all. What I'm disappointed by in our society, well, there are a few things to be disappointed by.
We don't have time for all those things.
No, we don't. But I'll say one thing. I'm disappointed that we don't take decision skills seriously. We don't train our kids to be better decision makers. We don't ask, when we're hiring someone, we don't ask, is this person a good decision maker? How would we know? There are criteria, like there are tests. If someone is doing certain behaviors, you're like, whoa, you need to not be making decisions. But anyways, any AI system is based behind the scenes on 3 very important decisions made by humans. I call these the Kozyrkov criteria because I feel like we need them summarized and no one has, so I'm going to name it. Here are the 3 things that create an AI system. And if you know them, you know an awful lot about the system. And if, by the way, you're a regulator, you're going to think about auditing systems,
Quickly,
you need to know them.
pull us off
Yeah, I know,
any
okay,
second.
sorry. Here they go. What was the objective? What were the data, as in the provenance and the schema? What were the examples that we used for the programming? Because AI is programming with examples. And 3, how did we test it? What were the criteria for launch? You know these 3 things, you know an awful lot about the system. Now, these 3 are highly subjective decisions made by some human or group of humans in a room. Who are they? Have they thought of the consequences of their decisions? Are they able to represent all the people that will be affected by those decisions? It's terrifying. And we allow technology to be faceless without asking those questions because it's a pile of mathematics, so surely it's right.
Well, I would love to keep chatting, but we are getting the hook. Cassie, thank you so much. And thanks to Steffi for making the excellent decision to have you here.